My daughter-in-law made me cry in front of my entire family on Christmas Day. Not once, not twice. 22 times over the course of that holiday weekend, she delivered sharp, calculated blows to my dignity, each one more precise than the last. She did not use her hands. She used her words, her silences, and her perfectly timed performances. And my son stood right beside her every single time, nodding along like a man who had completely forgotten where he came from. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or make a scene. I waited. I am 67 years old, and I have spent 4 decades learning that the most dangerous man in any room is the one who never raises his voice. While she was busy humiliating me in front of the people I love most, I was quietly holding a card she did not even know existed. Before I go any further, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that a parent's love should never be used as a weapon against them, hit that like button and subscribe. What I did next changed everything. My name is Raymond. I am 67 years old, and for 38 years I worked as a licensed structural engineer. I built bridges, overpasses, parking structures, and commercial buildings all across the state of Ohio. I did not inherit my career or my savings. I built everything I own the same way I built those structures, one calculated measurement at a time, never cutting corners, never trusting anything that had not been properly tested under pressure. My wife Carol passed away 4 years ago from a brief and brutal illness that took her faster than either of us could prepare for. She was the warmth in our house. I was the structure. Together we raised one son, Daniel, and we were proud of the man he became. He was sharp, ambitious, and driven. He graduated from Ohio State with a finance degree and landed a position at a regional investment firm before he was 25. For a long time, I believed we had done something right. Then Daniel married Vanessa. I am not going to pretend that I saw the warning signs immediately. She was charming when she wanted to be, and Daniel was in love in the way that makes a man blind to everything uncomfortable. She called me Raymond from the very beginning. Never dad, never anything that acknowledged the relationship. I told myself it was a generational thing, a boundary thing, a small thing not worth making into a large one. But small things have a way of revealing the truth about large ones. The Christmas weekend started on a Friday evening. Daniel and Vanessa had moved into a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in a suburb outside Columbus about 18 months earlier. It was a lovely home, hardwood floors, vaulted ceilings, a wraparound porch I would have been proud to design myself. My daughter Patricia and her husband drove in from Pittsburgh with their 2 kids. My brother Gerald and his wife came up from Cincinnati. We were 11 people total, gathered for what was supposed to be the kind of Christmas that Carol would have loved. I arrived first, as I always do. I pulled my old Silverado into the driveway with a back seat full of wrapped gifts, a case of the good coffee Carol and I always kept for the holidays, and a slow cooker full of her beef stew recipe that I had spent the entire previous day making from memory. Vanessa met me at the door. She looked at the slow cooker in my hands, and her expression shifted in a way I had learned to recognize a small contraction around her eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of her mouth. She smiled anyway. "Raymond," she said, stepping back to let me in, "you really didn't have to bring food. I have the entire menu planned." "It's Carol's stew," I said simply. "The grandkids asked for it." "Of course they did." She turned away before I could read her expression fully. That was the first moment, not a direct insult, just a door that had been opened, a crack, and then quietly closed. I carried the slow cooker into the kitchen and set it on the counter. I was still arranging things when Vanessa came back in and moved it without a word to the far end of the counter, behind the coffee maker, where it was barely visible. She did not ask. She did not explain. She simply relocated it the way you relocate something you do not want anyone to notice. That was the first slight. The rest of the family arrived throughout the afternoon, and the house filled with the sound of children running and adults catching up. I sat in the living room with Gerald, and for a few hours it genuinely felt like Christmas. But I was watching Vanessa work the room. She was a skilled performer. She moved from group to group with a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at the right moments, touching arms, playing the gracious hostess with impressive precision. What she was also doing, and I began to notice this only gradually, was adjusting the narrative. When Patricia mentioned that I had taught Daniel to change his own oil when he was 14, Vanessa laughed warmly and said, "Oh, Raymond always exaggerates those old stories. Daniel told me he basically watched YouTube." She said it with a smile that made Patricia laugh along with her. Daniel said nothing. He was looking at his phone. That was the second one. I excused myself to use the restroom and walked down the hallway past the den. The door was partially open, and I heard Vanessa talking to her mother on the phone. Her voice was low but not whispering, the kind of volume you use when you are not worried about being overheard because you believe the person in question would not understand the significance anyway. "He brought that old slow cooker again," she was saying. "I swear it smells up the whole kitchen. I don't know why Daniel never just tells him not to bring things." I kept walking. That was the third one. By Friday night, we had settled into the rhythms of a large family holiday. The children were watching a movie. The adults were gathered around the kitchen table after dinner. Vanessa brought out a bottle of expensive red wine, the kind with a label that is designed to make other people feel slightly undereducated, and began pouring glasses. She moved around the table with practiced elegance. When she reached me, she paused. "Raymond, I know you don't usually drink the good stuff," she said pleasantly, already moving on to Gerald's glass. "There's beer in the garage fridge." She said it like a kindness. Every person at that table heard it as exactly what it was. Gerald caught my eye for just a fraction of a second. He said nothing. Neither did I. That was the fourth one. "I want to explain something here, because I have seen enough of these situations to know what people are thinking. They are thinking, why didn't you say something? They are thinking, why did you let it go on?" And I understand that reaction completely. I felt it myself, burning in my chest every single time. But I need you to understand my specific reason for staying quiet, and it was not weakness. 3 months before that Christmas weekend, my attorney, a man named Curtis who has handled my affairs for over 20 years, had advised me to wait until after the new year before making any changes to my financial structure. We were in the middle of a significant reorganization of the trust I had set up 2 years prior. The timing of any legal moves mattered. I had told Curtis everything about Daniel and Vanessa's behavior over the previous year, the small erosions, the pattern of disrespect. And he had counseled patients with the same language he uses for complex engineering problems. He told me to let the foundation settle before I start removing load-bearing walls. So I waited, and I counted. Saturday morning, I woke up early and went downstairs to make coffee. The house was quiet. I found my slow cooker of stew sitting on the back porch. It had been moved outside in the night. The temperature had dropped into the low 20s. The stew was frozen solid. I stood on that porch in my slippers and looked at Carol's slow cooker sitting in the cold and felt something harden inside me that has not softened since. That was the fifth one. I brought it inside, set it on the stove to thaw quietly, and said nothing. By Saturday afternoon, the family had gathered in the living room to exchange a few early gifts. Patricia's kids were vibrating with excitement. My brother was telling a long story about a fishing trip that everyone had already heard twice. It was, for a few hours, genuinely pleasant. Then Daniel's work colleague arrived unexpectedly, a man named Scott who apparently lived nearby and had stopped in to drop off a bottle of wine. Daniel introduced everyone around the room. When he got to me, he said, "And this is my father, Raymond. He's retired now." He said it the way you say, "He used to work at the mill." Past tense, diminished, already filed away. Scott extended his hand. "What did you do?" he asked politely. Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared from the kitchen. "He was in construction," she said pleasantly, handing Scott a glass of wine. "Now he just putters around." I looked at my son. He was nodding. "I spent 38 years designing the structures that hold up highways this man drives on every single day. I had a state license, a professional engineering stamp, and a body of work that spanned 4 decades. And I had just been summarized as someone who putters around." That was the 6th one. And the 7th, and by Saturday evening, the count had climbed to 11, each one a variation of the same theme: erasure delivered with a smile, demolition wrapped in pleasantness. The moment that changed everything happened Saturday night. The children were in bed. The adults were settled in the living room after a late dinner. Daniel had opened a second bottle of wine. Gerald and his wife were getting tired, talking about heading to their hotel. And Vanessa, relaxed and confident in her own home, began to tell a story. She was telling Patricia about their plans to renovate the house. New kitchen cabinets, hardwood refinishing, possibly converting the 4th bedroom into a proper home office for Daniel. She spoke about these plans with the casual confidence of someone who has never had to worry about where the money comes from. Patricia asked the natural question, "Is that a big project financially?" Vanessa waved her hand. "Oh, we're going to pull from the family fund," she said easily. "Raymond has that trust set up. Daniel's been named as the primary beneficiary, So we're going to start drawing from it for the renovation and then for the expansion we're planning next year. The room went completely quiet. Not because anyone else understood what she had just said. They went quiet because of the expression on my face, which I could not entirely control in that moment. My attorney had set up a revocable living trust 2 years prior. Daniel was named as a beneficiary, yes, but only upon my death, or under specific conditions I alone controlled. Vanessa was describing it as a personal checking account. She was treating the trust that represented my entire life savings, my retirement, Carol's life insurance settlement, and 40 years of carefully built financial equity as a home renovation fund. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his wine glass. "We should probably talk about that separately," I said, keeping my voice level. Vanessa looked at me with the tolerant smile she had been perfecting all weekend. "Raymond, it's just family. No one here is going to be shocked that you want to take care of your son." "I do want to take care of my son," I said. "That is not in question." I excused myself for the night shortly after. I went upstairs to the guest room, which, I noticed, had been used as overflow storage for their holiday decorations, with only a narrow path cleared to the bed itself. I sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the muffled conversation continuing below me, and I pulled out my phone. I called Curtis. He picked up on the third ring. He was at his sister's house for the holidays, but he had told me years ago that I could call any time. He answered the way people answer who know that a late call from a specific number means something serious. "Talk to me, Raymond," he said. I told him everything. Not just the weekend, all of it. The slow cooker on the porch, the beer in the garage fridge, the construction worker who putters around. And then I told him what Vanessa had said in the living room about drawing from the trust for a kitchen renovation and future expansion. Curtis was quiet for longer than was comfortable. Then he said, "Raymond, she doesn't have access to that trust. No one does except you." "I know that," I said. "Does Daniel know that?" I thought about his expression when Vanessa made her announcement. I thought about the way he looked at his wine glass instead of at me. "I don't think Daniel has read the trust documents," I said. Curtis let out a slow breath. "Okay, here is what I need you to understand. If Vanessa genuinely believes that trust is accessible to them right now, and if Daniel has been reinforcing that belief, we may have a larger problem. It is possible they have already consulted someone about how to access or challenge the terms." I felt the familiar cold clarity that I have always relied on in high-pressure situations. Engineers are trained to identify failure points before the structure collapses, not after. "Curtis," I said, "how quickly can we move?" "As quickly as you need," he said. "But Raymond, are you sure? This is your son." I looked around the guest room. I looked at the boxes of Christmas decorations stacked against the wall, the single narrow path to the bed that had been considered sufficient for a 67-year-old man with a bad hip. I thought about the slow cooker on the frozen porch. I thought about Carol's stew, frozen solid, like it had been deliberately put outside to die. "He made his choice," I said. "Every single day of this weekend, he made his choice. I just need you to make sure the paperwork reflects mine." Curtis told me he would have his team ready first thing Monday morning, 2 days away. He told me the specific steps we could take: amending the beneficiary designations, restructuring the trust distributions, and revoking a secondary access document that I had previously signed, giving Daniel limited power of attorney for emergencies. I had signed that document 3 years ago when I had a minor cardiac event and Carol had just passed. I was not going to need a man who put his wife's renovation plans above his father's dignity to make emergency decisions on my behalf. Sunday was its own kind of endurance. The morning started with slights 12 through 15 in rapid succession. At breakfast, Vanessa told her mother on a video call with me sitting at the table that the holidays were exhausting when you had to accommodate everyone's needs and quirks. She did not look at me when she said it. She did not have to. Slight 13 was when Daniel asked me to help carry boxes from the garage and then told me, in front of Patricia's husband, to "Take it easy, we don't want you throwing your back out. I have lifted structural steel. I build things for a living." Slight 14 was Vanessa removing the framed photograph of Carol and me from the mantel to make room for her decorative arrangements, setting it face down on the end table. Slight 15 was Daniel watching her do it and saying nothing. By Sunday afternoon, the family was beginning to make their gradual departures. Gerald and his wife said their goodbyes. Patricia hugged me for a long time near the front door, the way she does when she is trying to communicate something she does not know how to say out loud. I told her I was fine. She told me to call her. The final 3 hours of that weekend were just the four of us. Me, Daniel, Vanessa, and the particular tension that settles over a house when everyone has stopped performing for an audience. Vanessa had been drinking wine since early afternoon. Her composure had softened into something looser and more careless. She was sitting on the couch with her phone, and Daniel was clearing the table, and I was in the kitchen washing the serving dishes because that is the kind of man I am. I do not leave other people's kitchens messy. Vanessa called from the living room. Raymond, don't worry about all that. We have a cleaning service coming Tuesday. I don't mind, I said. I know you don't mind, she said, and her tone shifted into something I had not heard from her before, less performative, more direct. That's actually kind of the problem. I turned off the faucet. I mean, she continued, and I could hear the whine in her voice, the loosening of the careful script she usually followed. You kind of just insert yourself into our home, into our plans. You show up with your slow cooker, you rearrange the kitchen, you sit there like it's still your family gathering to run. Daniel and I have our own life, Raymond, our own way of doing things. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I walked to the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. I stood there and looked at her. Are you saying you don't want me here for Christmas? I asked. My voice was completely steady. She let out a short laugh. I'm saying we're adults. Daniel and I are building something. And sometimes the way you hover it makes it harder. Daniel had come back into the room. He stood near the hallway, and I looked at him. He looked at the floor. I understand, I said. And then I did the thing that I knew would unsettle her more than any argument. I nodded. I thanked them both for the weekend. I said the food was wonderful, which was almost entirely untrue since Carol's stew had been hidden on a porch for 12 hours. I folded the dish towel neatly, placed it on the counter, picked up my coat, and walked out the front door to my truck. I sat in the driveway for a moment. I was not crying. I was calculating. Monday morning, I was in Curtis's office at 8:30. His team had already drafted 3 documents. The first was an amendment to the living trust, removing Daniel as the primary beneficiary and designating a charitable foundation. Carol and I had always talked about establishing in her name. The second was the formal revocation of the limited power of attorney I had granted Daniel 3 years prior. The third was a letter not threatening, not emotional, purely factual addressed to Daniel and Vanessa, informing them of the changes and their effective date. I read every page carefully. I asked the questions I needed to ask. And then I signed every line in my firm, clear handwriting, the same signature that had stamped engineering plans for 38 years. Curtis looked at me across the desk when we were done. He had known me long enough to understand what this cost me. He did not offer false comfort. He simply said, "The foundation is a beautiful idea, Raymond. Carol would have liked it." I nodded. I picked up my copy of the documents and drove home. The letter was sent certified mail on Tuesday, requiring a signature upon delivery. I know the exact moment Daniel received it because he called me 17 minutes after the mail carrier would have left their street. He called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. Then I sent a single text message. I received your message. I'll be available to talk Thursday afternoon. I spent Wednesday doing what I always do, when I need to think clearly. I drove out to the Lake Erie shoreline, parked the Silverado at a pull-off I have used for 30 years, and walked along the water with my hands in my coat pockets. The lake in late December is cold and gray and enormous, and it has no opinion about anything. I find that useful. I thought about Daniel at 7 years old, following me around a job site with a hard hat 3 sizes too big for his head, asking me why bridges don't fall down. I thought about Carol holding his hand at the hospital when he had his appendix out at 12. I thought about the night before his wedding, when he and I sat on the back porch of our old house drinking coffee, and he told me he was going to take care of things, that I did not need to worry. I believed him. I had believed him completely. I was not angry anymore by the time I left the lake. I was something quieter and more permanent than anger. I was resolved. Thursday afternoon, Daniel called at exactly 2 o'clock. I answered. "Dad." His voice was strained in a way I had not heard since he was a teenager. "What is this? What did you do?" "I made adjustments to my estate plan," I said, "which is my legal right at any time. You removed me." His voice cracked slightly. "From everything. I restructured the trust to align with my actual intentions," I said. "You are welcome to have your own attorney review the documents." "Dad," a long pause. "Is this because of Christmas?" I thought carefully about my answer. I thought about all 22 moments across that weekend. I thought about the slow cooker on the frozen porch and the photograph of Carol set face down on the end table. I thought about being described as someone who putters around to a stranger in my son's living room. "It's because of the last 2 years," I said quietly. "Christmas was just the weekend you let me see it clearly." Another long pause. I could hear him breathing. Then, "Vanessa is. She doesn't always." "Daniel," I said. I kept my voice gentle because I am still his father and I will always be his father. "I am not interested in discussing Vanessa's behavior right now. I am telling you that the choices you made, not her choices, yours have consequences. You chose every single time." He did not have a response to that. There is not a response to the truth, spoken plainly by a man who built things that are still standing after 40 years. "What do I have to do?" he asked finally. "Nothing, right now," I said. "I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I'm telling you that I love you, and that love does not mean unlimited tolerance. Figure out who you are, son. Call me when you have." I ended the call. I sat for a long moment in my kitchen. The house was quiet the way it has been quiet since Carol passed, a specific kind of quiet that you either learn to live inside of or it hollows you out. I have learned to live inside it. The weeks that followed were their own process. Daniel and Vanessa came to learn, through their own inquiries, that the trust had been legitimately restructured and that no challenge to the amendment would succeed. I later heard from Patricia that Vanessa had been furious, the volcanic, disbelieving fury of someone who has never before encountered a boundary that held. I was told she blamed Daniel. I was told there were significant arguments about what she had said to me on Sunday evening and whether she had said it at all. I did not ask for details. It was not my marriage. The renovation did not happen. The expansion did not happen. The family fund Vanessa had casually referenced in the living room in front of my entire family remained exactly what it had always been, mine. I did receive a phone call from Daniel 6 weeks later. It was a Sunday morning. He called before 9, which he had not done since he was in college, and needed something. This time, he did not need anything. He just said, "Dad, I owe you an apology, a real one, not a phone call." He asked if he could come over. He came the following Saturday. He sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. He told me things about the previous 2 years that I had mostly suspected but had not known with certainty. He told me he had seen himself in the Christmas weekend photographs that Patricia had posted, photographs I had not seen, and that he did not recognize the man standing next to his father. He told me that Vanessa and he were in counseling. I did not promise him anything that day. I did not restore the trust documents. I made him coffee, good coffee, the kind Carol and I always kept, and I listened. I asked a few questions. I told him that the door between us was not closed, but that it would not simply open automatically the way it once had. It would have to be opened deliberately, from his side, over time. He nodded. He understood. Before he left, he stood at the front door and looked at the framed photograph of Carol that I keep on the table in the entryway. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "I forgot what she sounded like for a minute. I don't want to forget what you sound like either." It was the most honest thing he had said to me in 2 years. It was not enough to undo everything, but it was a beginning. And I have been an engineer long enough to know that every sound structure starts with a single load-bearing element placed precisely and deliberately in the right position. I live simply now, in the same house Carol and I bought 30 years ago. I did not move to a cabin in the mountains. I did not disappear into a new life. I have my coffee in the morning, my walks by the lake when the weather allows, and the ongoing work of establishing the foundation in Carol's name. We are funding literacy programs for children in communities that look like the one she grew up in. It is, as Curtis said, exactly what she would have liked. The slow cooker is on my kitchen counter where it belongs. I made Carol's beef stew last Sunday and brought it to Patricia's house for dinner. Her kids had 2 bowls each. Her youngest, who is 5 and does not filter anything, said it was the best thing she had ever eaten in her whole life. It tasted exactly right. The greatest thing I learned from that Christmas weekend is something I should have known in my bones from 40 years of building things. A structure is only as sound as its foundation. You cannot build on ground that has been quietly eroding beneath you and expect the walls to hold. The kindest thing a man can do for himself and for the people he loves is to assess the foundation honestly, address the failure points before the collapse, and never mistake courtesy for weakness. I was courteous. I was patient for the right reasons and for the right amount of time. And when I finally moved, I moved with precision. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe that a father's dignity is worth protecting, that kindness is not the same as surrender. Hit that like button and subscribe. I read every comment, and I answer the ones that matter.